పిలు పాప ఈ నల్ల కుక్కని.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us in this conversation on our YouTube page. Now, this is part of our recurring series called Pass the Mic. The idea with this series is to have conversations that help us understand various aspects of our own society better. Now, Pass the Mic is a series where we discuss Dalit issues specifically. And this is particularly an episode that I was really looking forward to because Cynthia Stephen joins us right now. She's a brilliant writer, and she's somebody I admire greatly. All across South, in fact, she's called Cynthia Ka. She's an activist and a writer who has written extensively on issues facing the Dalit community. She's also worked a lot with people within the Christian community who are Dalit. So it's a unique perspective that we haven't got from anybody else so far. So I'm very happy to have her join us in this conversation. She's been kind enough to agree to answer my questions and answer your questions. If you're joining us live, you can ask us questions in the live chat window. Cynthia, good evening. Thank you for joining us. I think it's amazing. I think it's amazing the amount of work that you've done with the media talking about these issues. But and I just want to hand the platform to you to tell us your story. How did you decide to become an activist and a writer? Tell us your story.
Yeah, sure. Now, what I would like to start saying is that the entirety of my work has been quite influenced by my childhood and the places where I studied and grew up. And I now realize that what a profound impact it has had on my work and life and understanding of what are the possibilities for positive social change in our country. Why do I say this? Though I want to qualified parents who are based in Bangalore, who are natives of Bangalore, and I was born in Bangalore myself. My dad's job, which was as a geologist, took us to places quite remote and isolated. I remember as a little girl staying in a small village in Tumkur district in Tiptur Taluk. One of my first memories is walking around that place where he was. And then after that, when I was about 3 years old or so, we moved to Bellary, where a large portion of my till I lived and continued to base our home was there in district, in various places, in city, Bangalore, Bellary city itself, town itself, for quite a while till I was in 8th standard. After that, we moved to a nearby Taluk town. Everybody has heard about these mining areas because these are the places. It is really unique because I was the only girl in the young person, to have actually lived on those hills that everybody talked about and read about, during the mining scam. Those entire hill ranges in Bellary district and Sandur Taluk were places which were full of teak and sandalwood. We have leopards and orchids, and that's the places. Those are the kind of memories I have of and it is also that we also saw a lot of poverty. Workers from the mines workers in the fields in the villages where we stayed. These were really, really poor people. This is also the place which is the Devdasi system also existed in the neighboring Raichur district. So I saw a lot of the things that have now turned out to be my life's work. The issues of rural women, the issues of Devdasis, the issues of mine workers, of a deteriorating environment. I lived through these things. And those are some of the ways in which my perspectives were built. Bellary was also unique in the sense that though it is in Karnataka, it was earlier under the British in the Madras presidency. There was a lot of mixed population of Telugus, Kannadigas, Tamils, and a quite large population also there. So we grew up in a church which was quite, immune, if you like, to some of the caste issues that one sees in say, other parts of the country like Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, and southern Tamil Nadu in particular, and Kerala, where the church and the caste issues were quite closely linked. We hadn't a clue, not the foggiest notion about anything about caste and the church when we were growing up. This is how my life was. It was after my degree, finished my BSc, that I decided to switch from science. I was very keen on medicine and didn't get into the medical college. I almost got in, and then there was a slip between the cup and the lip, and I lost my opportunity. So then I got into the scientific field as a profession, and then moved on to another talent of writing, which I was always good at. And that's how I ended up studying Indian mass communication in the 80s. So did the famous journalism course there. Worked briefly in institutions in Delhi, but homesickness brought me right back home to Bangalore. And I entered the NGO sector, and that is where I got exposed to issues of how uh, economic problems could be sorted out by microcredit, which is what I did in the beginning. How urbanization impacts populations like urban poor. So these are all the projects on which I was working when I was in NGO. And it was in the 90s that I sort of got an entry into the women's sector. Earlier, it was economic empowerment. Later on, I got to the women's sector. And it was here that I got exposed to mass as part of the mobilizations that people got into for the UN World Conference on Women in Beijing in 1995. And so I was part of the team that organized this large, like unique group of people who were able to uh, uh, mobilize was to actually do this, travel across the country, motivating women from, fisher folk from Kerala and, from from Muslim women, Tamil Nadu, to apply for this, for the chance to, travel to Beijing. And so that's what I did. So we had this huge contingent of women from the grassroots who ended up in the national, international. We had women who were leaders in the urban poor movements here in Bangalore. It was a very, very unique experience. And that's where one saw how women across the world. When I came back from Beijing, I was actually unable to speak about those experiences for a very long time. I was deeply impacted. I never imagined, though I was myself a gender trainer, I was skilled and I was writing about gender. But it was only when you saw it at scale, you saw how women across the globe were struggling with issues of violence, of political, being caught in political battles. And you saw about how they were environmental refugees or, the survivors of environmental damage. All this was so powerful that I couldn't speak about it. But then after coming back and in the time subsequent to that event was where it was a life-changing experience. I went and came back. I was married in 1994. Then 95 was fully busy with Beijing. Then what's happening next? What are you going to do next after this? Because it was a short-term project and it was ending at the December 95. I said, I'm ready for a baby. And sure enough, as soon as I came back from Beijing, my daughter was conceived. I had a of my women's lives. And so there was this toss up. Is the baby going to first come first, or the book? In fact, the baby came first. The book was delayed. My daughter, who is now 24, 25 years old. So it was and that is also the time when in the year 2000, the Durban conference took place. Everyone might remember, some of us older people might remember that the Durban one, it was on racism and xenophobia. It's a UN Durban, and it was the time that the Dalit movement got internationalized. At that point, there was a BJP government in power in India, and they sent Omar Abdullah, one of the ministers of state, to argue about why the Dalit question was an internal problem of India and should not be internationalized. But there was within the country and people from outside who wanted to highlight to the world, talk about the Dalit issue in its real sense, the way Baba Saheb Ambedkar had analyzed, and that is, it was not just a structure in society which was, where people were allowed to work. I mean, they did their work. It was an occupational division, and it was a way of organizing society, and that's why India's civilization after so long has been so peaceful. This is the mainstream, majoritarian, a hegemonic narrative which had been promoted about the caste system in India.
So if I may please stop you for a second and ask you a couple of questions. One of our audience members said the same thing. He said, I thought that casteism was within the Hinduism structure or the Hindu religion. I didn't realize that it extended outside of that religion into other religions as well. Now, specifically to do with Christian Dalits, these are people who have converted to Christianity, but their caste has followed them. So, what kind of?
I was just
yes,
yeah,
please.
yeah. Caste is followed is it's yeah. I was just coming to building up to the story of how my consciousness of Dalitness was out of me. I did not, at the time when I was with the women's movement and the Beijing movement, and even after the Durban conference, I was Cynthia, why weren't you at the Durban conference? I was wondering, why me? What's that got to do with me? That is the reason I mentioned it is also so important, because shortly thereafter, I was after my two children, I was trying to get back into work, and I faced a situation wherein four places I applied. I almost made it into jobs, quite senior jobs in good institutions, but failed to make it ultimately. It was puzzling for me. And when in one case, in the last case, which became decisive actually, I heard something, in this organization we don't talk about Dalit. I was wondering, why did they? I had gone there to give my resume for the interview. I did, and subsequently after that conversation, which I didn't at that point think about, after the interview, I was. It was found after some weeks. I heard nothing, and then I called to check, and was found that I heard that another young lady had got this job, and she happened to be a Brahmin, well placed and all that, from a well-known family. Her parents as well as her spouse were from central services, so it must have been that kind of nepotism types of things. But I remembered, why? But this is not the only instance. So what is the reason I'm being excluded? Then that coin dropped. Somebody telling about, we don't talk about Dalit in this context. Then the question, Cynthia, why didn't you go to Durban? Oh, then my question was, is it that I'm being seen as Dalit? And it turns out that I first thought it was my South Indian identity. lots of NGO sector leadership. I thought that may have been a factor. Then the fact maybe that I was dark skinned, that may have also been a factor, I thought, because there is a color consciousness that happens. Everybody knows it. I think all these things in my stride, you can help, you can. And then I thought maybe because I'm a Christian, because my name clearly says I'm a Christian. And not only am I a Christian, I'm a practicing Christian. I'm not just a Christian in name. And I make no secret of it. So I thought these may have been the factors, but no, it was the combination of all these factors which made people understand correctly, and where I did not understand. This is very important. Others outside the system, having Dalit origins, I had no clue, and therefore were discriminating against me. This was a mind-blowing personal experience. And that is when I started then taking really seriously the Dalit itself. The Dalit Christian identity came a little later. So, but then the point is, that point is always made, that if you are a Christian, then you must have converted, or your parents must go, so you're all rice bags. So what is this concept, and why is it considered something to be and then there's also an important issue. We might laugh about, I find it amusing, that rice bag thing, but it's actually a casteist racist slur, and one of the good things you can do to these things is laugh. So I did laugh, but at one point you need to counter this as well. You can't allow people to get away with for choices they make, which they have every right to make. And so therefore that is important. But I would like to also remind all of us that even if my parents or grandparents converted many years ago, 100 years after that, I was also being against in a very, very subtle manner, but very significant manner. I was being excluded from jobs where decision-making and funding were required. And this is the kind of reality of people's lives in this country, that your identity, your social location is very, very, it really predisposes the quality of your life. So just because, even though I was equally talented, come and try to compete on an equal footing with your peers, and they happen to be from locations considered more acceptable than yours, that's where you lose out. And that's when I began to actually embrace the idea of my Dalitness and talk clearly about, in our families, that word never was spoken about. Our Dalit identity was never spoken about. It took me actually years to get my family, not even my mother never admitted. It was my aunt. I had to go to the US and
let me ask a couple of questions. Yes, this is true, and I've been called this on Twitter as well, where people say that, oh, you are a rice bag. For our audience who are still asking what is that insult or what does it mean, it effectively refers to the story. It's a story that they were Dalits who converted to Christianity in return for 2 bags of rice. Hence, they are called rice bag converts. And invariably, this slur is used against anyone with a Christian name who speaks up, saying, you are a rice bag convert, we will give you a bag of rice. Do you want 2 more bags of rice? That sort of thing. But what Cynthia is pointing out is that this is actually a racial and a casteist slur. It is a gully that people give, and it shouldn't be taken any other way. And that's really important. But I want to talk about the fact that, there is also this understanding that when someone converts, if there was a person of an oppressed caste who converted to Christianity, that they are now free of that caste. Because technically, on paper, Christianity doesn't have a caste system, and you're all equal in the eyes of God. Unfortunately, there is a lot that happens on earth that's not in the eyes of God, and this is not really true. You have found, if I'm not mistaken, instances of discrimination within the priests of the church itself. I mean, forget about the lay people and the congregation. Even the priests discriminate against people from oppressed castes. Is that correct?
Yes. In fact, if you look at the numbers of, see, I just lots of dialogue on this issue within the Catholic Church, and some of those dialogues I'm aware of. And I know that there's always been a huge number of disconnect between, you see, the if you look at the numbers of the of people, believers in the church, in the Catholic Church, I would say 60 to 70 people are people of either Dalit origin or Adivasi origin. And so the large numbers in the rank and file, if you look at the priesthood and the hierarchy, you will clearly see that they come from privileged sections. So this has, so if you even, for instance, any you will find, I think only now we have one cardinal who is from a tribal background. The first cardinal from a tribal background was some years ago, selected by the Pope, nominated by the Pope. And down the line, if you come right down the line, the numbers of seminarians who ultimately make it into the priesthood, the numbers of Dalit young people who get into the priesthood is quite small. And if you look at after that, because of their already small pool, if you look at the numbers who just rise up the hierarchy and become a bishop, very small numbers of bishops from Dalit origin in the Catholic Church. In contrast, there are smaller numbers of people from privileged caste backgrounds, but the overwhelming numbers of people in the leadership is very large if you compare the population within the church. This is a very simple, straightforward, issue of parity. From within the church. Similar things happen, and after that, I've actually had conversations with young priests when I used to at one point lots of sort of missions which did evaluations of the kind of activities that were undertaken by church-funded bodies. So I was with both and traveled extensively across the length and breadth of India's coast. Wherever the tsunami hit, from the Andhra coast right up to the Kerala coast, the tsunami affected areas. So I had opportunity to meet a lot of priests, and I've actually had conversations with young priests who wouldn't even reveal that they were Dalits in the jeep, but when you're outside having lunch there, then they will say how they're carefully monitored and kept in line by any and everyone who is above them in the hierarchy. So they are given small parishes. Main large parishes are always given to people from upper villages. They're given resource poor parishes. You see, so there's a lot of, and then there's also, I was even actually heard this during Good Friday. On Maundy Thursday there is a foot washing ceremony, and I'm sorry to say this, but it is discussed many times, and it's really painful for me to talk about this, but I'm told that when there is free washing to be done, people need to sit and feet are supposed to, somehow they will see to it that it's the Dalit priest which is washing in the archbishopric or the bishop. The priest's feet they'll be sitting, but the Dalit priest will be the one washing the feet of the others. So somehow there is this caste. So it's only partly true to say that, okay, once you become a Christian, you're no longer, the caste system no longer has its grip on you. Clearly, from what I'm sharing, it does have a grip not only on the individual, but also on the institutionalized church. That is true. In that case, the question occurs, then why then, there are lots of people who say you can't be a Dalit and a Christian at the same time. Yes, illegally that is correct. If, for instance, in Karnataka, there is no such category as Dalit, legally speaking. You can never get a certificate saying you're a Christian and a Dalit at the same time. They'll give you a certificate, either you're saying you're a Christian or you're a Dalit. You can't have both. You can't have it both ways. That's how it is. Not only in Karnataka, in almost all over the country, that is the case. But the experience of caste discrimination is there even within the institutionalized church. I want to underscore this institutionalized church, because there are lots of churches outside the mainstream institutional church. Actually, there because, in fact, as a reaction or a response to the casteism, that they experience, leave the mainstream churches and go into independent congregations and worship centers uh, to be able to actually escape, to give what should I say, to express their sense of freedom and liberation, and say, we don't need to be in this system. We can have our own place of worship, and we don't need hierarchy looking down upon us.
So, Cynthia, the other question I did want to ask you today was about the fact that you've written extensively about feminism and the need to sort of evolve feminism to include women from all castes and all sections of society. You've started to call it womanism. Could you explain to us what the difference between the two things are?
Actually, it's a large and very big topic, and will need a lot of time to explicate. People who are really interested could go and I wrote on the subject, which is available on medium.com. It's called Dalit Women, Leadership and Beyond. Dalit Women's Movements, Leadership and Beyond, in which that's one of the first published instances where I discussed this concept of womanism. At that time, I have mentioned it as Dalit womanism. And because I felt that Dalit women's consciousness needs to be given a new name, feminism doesn't quite cut it. Dalit feminism is more is what I point. I know it's a very popularly used term, and the term that I have been proposing has been actually picked up in serious ways. But it exists in India, but it exists as a very, very vibrant form of theorizing, both in the Latin American communities, as well as in among the Black women, both in Africa and in the US. You see, at the time of everyone knows, most people who are in this field know that the term womanism was coined by her. But the term womanism might have been coined by her, but the idea was not hers. The idea came from the women leaders who were part of the mobilization of Black people in the civil rights movement. So they were women theologians, leaders of churches, pastors of Black churches, working side by side with the men. Notably Martin Luther King, who's Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was not only a leader of the Black community, also a priest. And so were a large number of other people who were part of it. But you see, because of the inherent sexism of the media and of the movement itself, there was an exclusion of the voices and visibility of Black women leaders of the civil rights. Everyone remembers Rosa Parks because she was the one who sat and didn't get up. But she was a leader herself in her own right of churches and communities in her city. And the Black theologians, the women theologians and pastors who ran churches, they came up with Black womanist theology as a response to Black theology, which basically was a gendered Black, man's understanding of their theology or their understanding. So it ran parallel. The theologians, they started writing. If you look at the history, you will find lots of Black women theologians who theorized from that perspective. It was that word that was picked up by Alice Walker and womanism. The womanist theology became womanism. The same way, there's another writer and thinker in Latin America. She was the idea of feminism encapsulating the lives of marginalized or poor women. And so she was looking for new language available in the net. And her name is Maria Isasi Dias. She was also a theologian, and she worked with women. She was looking for a word which was from feminista, which was feminism, feminist.
Yes.
In Spanish. She came up with the word mujer, which means woman. So it is same thing. Woman, womanist, womanism, mujer, mujerista. So that is the term that I was for, and that's how the term womanism came about to be applied in the Indian context.
Cynthia, I've actually run out of time right now, but obviously this would need a longer, deeper conversation. Also, we're having some issues with your audio at this point. So what we'll do is we will fix a second conversation early next week, maybe Monday or Tuesday, where we'll have a longer conversation on the representation. And this is a really important thing, especially for those of us who believe that we have supported women's rights and we're feminists, so we've spoken up for women's rights this entire time. It's important for us to step back and realize if we have excluded voices and what has caused us to exclude voices. Absolutely. And why the movement in India has not been properly inclusive and how we can change that. And we'll have a proper conversation about this early next week. But for now, Cynthia, thank you so much for joining me and answering these questions. And I apologize to our viewers about the challenge with the audio, but we'll try and fix that and we'll do a do-over of this conversation fairly soon. Thank you for watching for now. Good night.
Thank you so much. Good night.